if the reason that life has felt harder since you moved to your current city isn't you? It's the city. Maybe on paper, there's nothing wrong with where you live, but ever since you got there, something just feels off. Maybe dating suddenly became a nightmare, or your career feels like it's moving in slow motion or even going backwards. Well, according to astrology, where you live can actually change which parts of your natal birth chart are emphasized, and that's where astrocartography comes in. If you've never heard of astrocartography before, it's essentially a branch of astrology that takes your natal birth chart and maps it as lines moving across the globe latitudinally and longitudinally, showing you where specific planetary energies may become stronger and more emphasized for you. So that means that there are certain cities where life feels easier and certain cities where life feels harder. So for example, you can have cities where Venus becomes more prominent, or cities where Jupiter's energy is strong for you. And in both of those cases, this generally would bring more levity, more luck, more romance into your everyday life, which I think we can all agree is a net positive. But on the flip side, you could also have cities where planets like Pluto or Neptune become more prominent, which could very well bring more feelings of restriction or hardship or conflict or deception into your life, which we can also probably all agree are a net negative. Today, I want to talk about some of the harder astrocartography lines that can make living in a city feel more intense, more difficult, more frustrating, more confusing, or just plain hard, and some of the signs that you might actually be living on one of those lines right now. And there's one more piece you need to understand before we dive into these extra difficult planetary lines. If you are completely new to astrocartography, you'll notice that each of the planetary lines on your personal astrocartography map are labeled AC, DC, MC, and IC. These actually represent the 4 prominent angles of your birth chart. Your ascendant or your AC is associated with you, your identity, your sense of self, how you move through the world, and how you're perceived. The descendant or the DC is associated with your one-on-one partnerships and close connections. Your MC or your midheaven is associated with your career, your reputation, and your visible public life. Oh, and one last thing, let me introduce myself. How rude of me. Hello, my name is Montana with Astrocartography for Babes, where I teach you how to use astrocartography to find the best places for you in your country and around the globe for love, career, and overall happiness based on your unique birth chart. I do offer astrocartography readings, so please feel free to check out the link for those in the description box below. With that said, let's get into it and explore some of those difficult planetary lines. And let's start with probably the most obvious one, which is Saturn lines. In astrology, Saturn is associated with discipline, responsibility, restriction, structure, boundaries, delays, maturity, and good old-fashioned, honest, hard work, okay? It is the ruler of Capricorn, and it's also associated in traditional astrology with the sign of Aquarius. So wherever you have Saturn in your chart, you are likely to experience these Saturnian themes that I just mentioned. You have Saturn in your 5th house natally, which is the house of romance and children and hobbies and fun. Then you may have been a late bloomer in the dating department, for example, or maybe you still wonder to this day, have I ever been in love? Or maybe you had to grow up really quickly and take on a lot more responsibilities from an early age, which limited how much time you had for fun or creativities or hobbies. So if you move to a city along one of your Saturn lines, you may find that the area of life represented by that particular line starts requiring more hard work, more patience, more discipline, and you may experience more delays and hardship in that area. So let's start with Saturn MC Lines, for example. So remember, your midheaven is associated with your career, your reputation, your public life, and what you are known for. Along a Saturn MC line, all of those Saturnian themes around work and discipline and restriction and delay, and eventually mastery, hopefully, will become more prominent in your professional life. So the more positive manifestation of this is that yes, you can build something incredibly substantial here in your industry, right? So maybe you're a professor, a researcher, an attorney, a physician, an architect, whatever your field is, and over time, you become someone who's greatly respected for your knowledge and your expertise and your authority. That's Saturn. Saturn builds things that last. But Saturn also generally isn't handing you the keys to these more positive outcomes on day one. That type of achievement, if you get there at all, comes through a lot of time and discipline and patience and perseverance. And in the meantime, with Saturn, there can be a long meantime where you're just sitting there thinking like, why have I been working my butt off for 3 years and absolutely nothing has come easy, or like I don't feel like I have as much to show for it as I think I should. Maybe you'd watch coworkers which seem to advance faster than you, while you feel like you've had to prove yourself over and over again in order to receive the same level of recognition. Or you could find that you've had to take on more responsibility at work without getting the title or the money or the acknowledgement that should come with that additional responsibility. Or maybe you feel like your entire career is moving on Saturn's timeline instead of yours, which is slow progress, delays, setbacks, and then the constant requirement for you to show that you are ready for all of this, right? And yes, Saturn MC Lines can eventually correspond with authority and expertise and a very solid and lasting professional reputation, but personally, I would want to know what I'm signing up for before living on my Saturn MC line. Now, let's move Saturn over to the descendant with Saturn DC lines. So the DC, or the descendant, is associated with partnerships, marriage, and close one-on-one relationships with other people. So now these Saturnian themes that we just talked about are showing up through your one-on-one relationships. So this could look like relationships feeling harder to establish or slower to develop, or maybe your dating life just feels unusually dry or serious or restrictive, and that finding the type of partner that you want seems to take much longer than it typically did before you moved there, right? You also could be feeling just straight up blocked romantically, like love is happening for everyone else around you except for you. Or perhaps you're with a partner who is significantly older, that's Saturn, right? Or super serious or emotionally distant, someone who puts work before you, or maybe depending on the nature of your relationship, like it requires you to take on more responsibility than you should in your young relationships. Or if you are not single and you come there partnered, maybe your relationship starts to feel very heavy. So instead of romance feeling playful and effortless, the relationship can begin to revolve around commitment, responsibilities, boundaries, like the practical realities of life that, like, yes, is part of life, but shouldn't be the main description of your relationship. That is why I consider Saturn DC lines super difficult. And lastly, let's talk about maybe the hardest Saturn line of all, which is the Saturn AC line. As we chatted about, the AC line or ascendant is associated with you, your identity, your physical body, how you move through the world and experience life. And the Saturnian energy on a Saturn AC line becomes very personal here, right? So you might find yourself becoming more serious, more reserved, more bogged down. It's just pretty heavy, right? You might also feel like your life has become more demanding, or that there's more responsibilities that are constantly weighing on your shoulders, and just not as many opportunities as there should be to relax and be carefree. You also might just feel hard on yourself, right? Like you're behind, you need to work harder, you should have accomplished way more by now. It's just this maturity and self-discipline can feel very forced upon you. So if your experience after moving to your current city has sounded like anything I just described, career delays, heavier responsibilities, isolation, relationship difficulties, or just feeling like everything is taking 4 times as much effort, I would pull up your astrocartography map and check to see if you're living on one of your Saturn lines, and then pay attention to what angle the Saturn line is on, because that will tell us a lot more or confirm exactly where those Saturnian themes are showing up for you. If you are living on your Saturn line, if you've ever lived on one, leave me a comment below, share your experience with the community. Saturn stories are usually never fun, but they're always at least pretty interesting. Next up, we have Mars lines, and Mars lines are a very different type of difficult from the Saturn lines that we just talked about. Saturn tends to be slow. It brings restrictions, delays, hardships, pressure, anything that you have to work incredibly hard for in order to get. Mars is almost the opposite. Mars is fast, it's hot. Mars wants action. In astrology, Mars is associated with action, aggression, conflict, competition, our willpower, our sexuality, our physical energy, those types of things, how we go after what we want. Mars rules Aries and is the traditional ruler of Scorpio, and you know the vibe of those two signs, right? So wherever you have Mars in your birth chart, you are very likely to experience the Martian themes that we just discussed. So for example, if you have Mars in your 3rd house natally, Mars is going to be showing up in the part of your chart associated with communication. thinking, learning, siblings, and short distance travel, right? You probably have a very direct, assertive, fast, or even confrontational style of communication. And you probably aren't someone who's afraid to say exactly what they think. Or let's say you have Mars in your fourth house natally, right? Now that same Mars energy is showing up in your fourth house, which is associated with family, upbringing, and your private life. So that means that you may have grown up in a home where there was a lot of conflict, a lot of arguing, there was maybe some tension, or maybe one of your parents had a particularly strong or assertive personality, or maybe even had a bit of a temper. So let's start with your Mars DC line. And remember, your descendant is associated with your one-on-one interactions with other people. So along your Mars DC line, you are much more likely to experience aggression, conflict, and competition through other people that you encounter. So you may find yourself dealing with people who are more assertive, who are more impatient, who are kind of confrontational towards you. And maybe you move to a city on your Mars DC line and it feels like all of a sudden you're arguing with everybody, that your coworkers challenge you, that your neighbors irritate you, or maybe your friendships become more competitive for no reason and they kind of just pop off at you for reasons that you can't quite understand. Maybe you find yourself in situations where people are constantly pushing up against your boundaries, forcing you to stand up for yourself. It just sounds tiring, right? And this also can be especially noticeable in your one-on-one relationships because Mars also rules desire and passion and sexuality. There could be some incredibly strong attraction and sexual chemistry that you experience on your Mars DC line. You might meet someone and immediately think, oh, okay, this is really intense. But that intense chemistry doesn't necessarily translate to a peaceful, lasting relationship. You're fighting all the time. Maybe both of you constantly want to be right. Maybe you're competing against each other, or your disagreements really escalate in a way that you really didn't experience before you moved to this city. It's going to feel tiring and exhausting, especially if you're someone who has their Venus in Libra or Taurus or a Pisces moon, where you really value harmony and peace in your relationships. If I'm intentionally choosing a city where I want to build healthy relationships and have good professional connections, I would not want to live in a city along my Mars DC line, especially long term. Let's move on to our Mars IC line. Remember that your IC is associated with your home, your family, your roots, and your private life. This is another line that I would just feel very cautious about living long term, because your home is ideally the place that you come back to and you want to decompress at. You know, you go out into the world, you work with people, you deal with traffic, you deal with stress, and you want to come home and be able to turn all of that off. But along your Mars IC line, you are bringing that Martian sense of conflict, aggression, irritation, heat, action directly into your home and private life. And so that, for example, could look like more conflict in the household. Maybe you live with a partner and all of a sudden the two of you are arguing way more than you used to in the home. If you have a roommate, maybe there's just like this ongoing tension that makes it very difficult to live together peacefully. Or maybe your family relationships become more combative and you find yourself having to defend these boundaries, or you're fighting over what happens within the home with your kids or your partner. Mars IC lines, though, don't necessarily have to mean that the conflict is happening inside your home. You could also notice that the environment immediately surrounding your home feels more Martian. So maybe your neighbors are constantly fighting outside, or there's like these loud confrontations happening next door to you. Maybe you regularly hear sirens or yelling or other disturbances around your home. And in more extreme manifestations, you also could feel like that there is maybe an element of danger or volatility surrounding where you live. Not necessarily something directly that happens to you, but because the environment itself just doesn't feel peaceful or secure. If I move somewhere and I found myself suddenly thinking like, why is there always something going outside my house? I would absolutely check to see if I was living on my Mars IC line, because that's ultimately my biggest issue with this line as a place to live. Is that home is supposed to be where you go to get away from the conflict and stress of the outside world, not where that Martian energy finds you and follows you. If your experience since moving to your city has sounded anything like what I described, like getting into arguments way more than you used to, constantly encountering confrontational or aggressive people, or your relationships are just very heated in a way that's like doesn't feel sustainable, I would pull up your astrocartography chart and see if you are living on any one of your Mars lines. And if you are living or have lived on your Mars line, tell me in the comments, tell everybody else in the comments what your experience was, so you can help everybody learn through your personal experiences. Did you find yourself arguing way more than usual, or having these like combative friends, or having to defend yourself more than usual? Because I know Mars IC stories are never peaceful. Okay. Next up, we have Pluto lines, the infamous Pluto lines. Okay, we've talked about the heaviness and restrictive nature of Saturn. We've talked about the heat and aggression and conflict of Mars, but Pluto brings a whole new different type of difficulty, because Pluto is all about intensity and transformation. In astrology, Pluto is associated with power, control, obsession, intensity, crisis, endings, rebirths, okay? All of those heavy and intense types of things. Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio, right? And you know what type of energy Scorpio will always bring to the function. So wherever you have Pluto in your chart, you are likely to experience these Plutonian themes. So for example, if Pluto is in your 7th house natally, the house of one-on-one relationships will be the area of your life where you will experience this incredible intensity, powerful attraction, obsession with or to the people that you're dating, control issues, or maybe even dating people who have a bit of a darker edge to them. Pluto tends to take whatever area of your life that it touches and makes it deeper, more intense, and harder to experience in a casual way. That is especially important when talking about Pluto lines, because remember, when you live near one of those planetary lines, you're making that planetary energy become angular, bringing it to your ascendant, your descendant, your MC, or your IC. Let's start with Pluto AC lines, now that we understand why Pluto energy can be so intense. When Pluto is on the ascendant on a Pluto AC line, this energy becomes extremely personal. So this is likely one of those cities where you are going to arrive as one version of yourself and leave as a completely different version. You might find yourself going through a period of intense personal reinvention, right? Like maybe an identity that you've carried for years just suddenly doesn't fit anymore. Your priorities completely change, your appearance could change, and your ambitions and goals could completely change. You could look back at yourself before moving there and just not recognize that version of yourself anymore. I guess that sounds kind of okay, right? Well, with Pluto, the thing is that the transformation that takes place typically is not smooth, and it's not easy or flowing, because Pluto is going to force things that have been buried underneath the surface to become much harder to ignore. You may now become aware of your greatest fears. You cannot ignore your deepest insecurities, your most secret compulsions and desires, or your most shameful patterns that you've been able to avoid confronting somewhere else. You are now forced to look at them dead center, okay? And of course, actual transformation can also involve loss and endings and uncertainty, and letting go of things that you had a deep attachment to. And this is why Pluto AC lines are not somewhere that I would recommend moving just because you want to reinvent yourself, okay? Because you are not going to choose how that reinvention is going to happen. Pluto chooses, and when Pluto chooses, that transformation is never fun. Now, let's put Pluto on the midheaven, on Pluto MC lines. So your MC is what you're associated with career-wise. Hold on. So your MC is what you are associated with career-wise, and your public visibility, the types of things you're known for professionally, right? So Pluto is going to bring those themes of power and intensity and your control to your professional life. And yes, while there can absolutely be a very powerful manifestation of this can also just make your professional life feel very intense, okay? So you may encounter bosses, coworkers, competitors, or institutions that are trying to take away your power, or where your control constantly has to be negotiated, or it's taken away, or someone is fighting for that, right? So for example, maybe you're dealing with workforce politics that feel completely disproportionate to the actual job that you're doing, or maybe somebody above you or even like linear to you seems determined to control your career. Or maybe you become obsessed with succeeding and you realize that your career is consuming far more of your life than you ever wanted or intended. Your career itself may go through very dramatic endings and rebirths, right? So like you could build one personal professional identity and then it collapses through a series of crazy, intense events. So then you reinvent yourself and you end up building something that's completely different. That is a very different experience than a Saturn MC line. Saturn MC lines can feel like climbing a mountain very slowly, whereas Pluto MC lines feel like the mountain that you started to climb exploded and now you're buried under the rubble and now you have to claw your way up and then build a brand new one. But because of that, you gained a lot of muscles and like strength and now you're super strong, but now you are also a monster. But yes, overall, both the Saturn MC line and Pluto MC lines can correspond with tremendous power and accomplishment, but the mechanism that they're going to get you there are very different and they're both very difficult in their own way. So if your experience in your current city has sounded like anything that I just described with regards to feeling completely changed as a person through difficult experiences or having these really intense career struggles or being consumed by a goal or just experiencing these major endings and reinventions or complicated dynamics, I would absolutely pull up your astrocartography chart and check to see if you live near one of your Pluto lines. And if you live on a Pluto line, tell me in the comments, what has your experience been like? Which Pluto line was it? AC, DC, MC? Did you end up forced to completely reinvent yourself? Did your home or career life become more intense? Let me know. So looking after all of these lines, I want to bring us back to where we just started from the beginning, which is if life has felt noticeably harder since you moved to your current city, it might be worth looking at your astrocartography map. Maybe your life suddenly feels like an uphill battle and it turns out you're living near your Saturn MC line. Maybe your relationships have just felt blocked or your partner and you now feel very cold when relating to each other and maybe you're on your Saturn DC line. Maybe you feel like you're constantly dealing with conflict and fights and aggression from other people and turns out you're on your Mars DC line, right? So this doesn't mean every difficult thing in your life is happening because of astrocartography, but if you can clearly divide your life into before I moved here and after I moved here, then I think your map is worth investigating. And if you're watching this and thinking like, okay, Montana, I just need you to look at my map because I have no idea what I'm looking at, I do offer personal astrocartography readings and the information for that is in the description below. If you liked this video and found it helpful, give it a like, subscribe to Astrocartography for Babes because I love talking about astrocartography and how to use it for travel, love, and career to better understand why different cities feel so dramatically different for you. And if you want to keep the learning going, YouTube has picked out another video for you that it thinks that you might like based on what you've been watching, and it is right here. So click on that one and I will see you there.